I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Welcome, everybody, to the Budget's Friday meetings. I'd like to call this meeting, of course, to the Budget Committee to order. And just a reminder that you can follow us on toronto.ca/council, or you can watch YouTube at Toronto City Council Live. Are there any declarations of possible conflict under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. Need a motion to confirm the minutes of the Budget Committee meeting of May 11th, 2007. Councillor Layton will move that. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Let's proceed with the review of the agenda. Now we do have, just to let everybody know, we have 3 new items to attach. You have them in pink on your desks. We'll add those to the agenda at the end. Okay, let's begin. BU 33.1, Capital Variance Report for the year ending December 31st, 2016. Councillor Layton will move that. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. The Operating Variance Report for the 12-month period ending December 31st, 2016. Councillor Layton will hold. BU 33.3, Reserves and Reserve Fund Variance Report, December 31st, 2016. Councillor Campbell will move that. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. BU 33.4, Children's Services Amendment to the 2017 operating budget to reflect increase in provincial. Yeah, we actually have a deputation on that. So
really,
yeah, there's a new deputation has just put their name in, so we'll hold that for that deputations. BU 33.5, Facilities 2017 Capital Budget and 2018-20 to 26 Capital Plan and Adjustments and Accelerations and Deferrals. Councillor Carroll move adoption. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. BU 33.6, Adjustments and Deferrals Accelerations to the Parks, Forestry and Recreation 2017 Capital Budget 2018 to 26 Capital Plan. Councillor Nunziata will move that. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. BU 33.7, Transportation Services 2017 Capital Budget Adjustments. Councillor Nunziata will move that. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. BU 33.8, Adjustments to the 2017-26 Capital Plan Budget Plan for Transportation Services, Bonnington Place.
if I could hold that, if we can deal with it very quickly. I just
have a question.
Yeah, I have.
I'll hold it for Councillor Layton. BU 33.9, Adjustment to the 2017 to 26 Capital Budget Plan for Transportation Services, McBride Lane.
Section 37.
Councillor Carroll is going to move that. So all in favour? Opposed? That's carried. BU 3310, Toronto Public Library 2017 Capital Budget and 2018 to 26 Capital Plan Adjustments, first quarter. Sorry, Councillor. Would you like to hold it? Okay, Councillor Campbell, hold it. BU 33.11, Final Operating Budget Variance for the Toronto Police Services, year ending December 31st, 2016. I'll hold that as we have a deputation on that. Now we have 3 items, new items. Long-term care home and services 2016 year-end capital budget adjustment. Have a motion to include as a new item. Councillor DiCiano, all in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Next item is staff complement in legal services, temporary positions for expropriations work. Just a motion to put it on the agenda. Councillor DiCiano again, all in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And the last item is Facilities, Real Estate and Environment and Energy, 2017 Capital Project, Ward 36, 705, Progress Building Improvements Project Amendment. Again, just a motion to put it on the agenda. Councillor DiCiano will put that on. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Okay. Yeah, we're going to hold them. I'm going to put them out. Did anybody want to move any of these, or just want to leave them till the end?
I'm happy to move them if,
Okay, want to hold 14?
so the staff complement and legal services, I'll move.
Yeah, so the long-term, are there any questions? Has everybody looked at them? Are there any questions on long-term care or staff complement? If we want to move them as a quick item, we could do that. Oh.
The legal services, our staff hasn't seen it. We just need to do a technical
Okay.
amendment to the recommendation.
Okay, so why don't we move, if it's okay, we'll move the long-term care homes and services, 2016 year-end capital budget. If Councillor Layton, you can move that one, we can get that off, and we have to hold the other one because staff have to have a look at that. So all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Yeah. Okay, we will begin with our deputations. So we'll start with BU 33.4, and we have a speaker, Jane Mercer. So this is the Children's Services Amendment to the 2017 operating budget to reflect increase in the provincial contributions. Welcome, Jane. You'll have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you. In all the excitement of this week, I had neglected to get on the list for deputation, so thank you for taking me on. My name is Jane Mercer. I'm with the Toronto Coalition for Better Childcare. We represent over 200 not-for-profit childcare members across the city and try to speak for the thousands and thousands of families who desperately need childcare in this city. It is a real pleasure to come here to the Budget Committee in June instead of January, to come and speak with you in a really good news week for childcare instead of a bad news week. I want to thank you very much for your support of childcare, and especially the Toronto Childcare Growth Strategy, which passed with such incredible support just a few weeks ago, that it was very heartening to see our City Council step up in such a huge way. So we thank you for your leadership in that. The province has just announced this week a huge commitment, I think the largest commitment we've had for childcare in well over a decade. I know that there will be all sorts of strings attached and details, and it won't all come in one big fat check, but nonetheless, it is over $36 million for childcare in Toronto, which is a massive investment. So we are very excited about that, as we know you must be and your staff must be, and that Toronto childcare growth strategy will be the plan that you've already got ready as to how to roll that out. So we look forward to working with you and your staff on that. I would like to emphasize, just stress, that the city did have a commitment in that Toronto Childcare Growth Strategy of 20% to be added into the childcare budget. You will remember, because it's only been 6 months and it comes around on a regular annual basis, that we frequently have to fight to hang on to all of our dollars for childcare. So I'm coming here at the midway mark to urge you to please find everything you can do to make sure every dollar possible from the province and from the city are both at the level that you've committed to, and that they all get directed into childcare spaces, subsidies, and keeping fees affordable for parents. It is really tough out there, and we want parents to really feel the impact of this. I was at a Toronto Catholic District School Board board meeting last night to urge them to do exactly the same. We have 3 levels of government: the province, the city, and the school boards, and we need every level of government to come together at the same time. So that was a positive response at the school board yesterday, and we want to thank you and urge you to keep working together and for the families across Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. Councillor Carroll.
Well, I only want to ask a quick question, because I was planning on raising this issue when we get to the operating variance. Isn't it true that we have a dual problem? If we're not putting something in the childcare stabilization reserve, as we are a number of other stabilization reserves, then we have a problem in that area with the plan in both capital and operating. Is that not the case?
We have and by problem, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure that I understand the detail of the
Well,
question, but we.
the recent announcement in the,
Money.
right, right. The recent announcement, funds coming our way, talk about building more spaces, but it also talks about being ready to fund more spaces and even
Yes.
a new program to expand how we regulate and fund spaces in home childcare. So we should be ready to address both building of spaces, which would be capital.
Yes.
And funding of spaces on a day-to-day basis, should we not?
Yes, absolutely. Operating has to be there to subsidize the families so that they can get in to these
Yeah.
childcare spaces.
So while you may not see me doing anything in the capital reserve, I am going to actually address a lot of what your deputation raised when we get to the next item, which is the operating variance.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
Thank
okay,
you.
thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Davis. So we're going to outside councillors now anyway.
The other thing that happened this week was, after this report was written, the province announced capital money that we have not yet heard about in terms of the actual amount Toronto will be receiving. But there will be growth with additional capital money from the province as well. Is that your
Yes,
understanding?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good news week. We can certainly say that. There's going to be a lot to keep an eye on, though, so in the rollout.
The one thing and you'll see I have a motion that Councillor Layton will support and the General Manager is supporting as well, which is that we do some consultation before the revised strategy comes back in the fall. Because we do want parents and the community, the childcare sector, to understand and to give some feedback on that revised version for the fall. Would you support that?
Yes, absolutely. I think you'll find, parents aren't coming to a budget committee meeting like this because, hey, they're busy working and they can't take a whole day off to be involved. But they are certainly very, very interested in your childcare plan and how this system expands. For those who can't get a subsidy, who can't get in various high-needs neighborhoods, and for those parents who are paying exorbitant childcare fees. We have a great deal of concern that actually the gap between our per diems and full fees is starting to widen in a big way in some corners. We're not quite sure why that is, whether it's the rules of the childcare budget aren't quite jiving with what the bookkeepers understand, but we've sometimes got a $10 gap. And that's alarming. And that, as you would know, Councillor Davis, actually drives up the full fee further.
So affordability continues.
Affordability.
Okay, great, thank you.
And if it can be an online consultation as well as an in-person, I think your staff would say that has been very successful in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
Just a question. You mentioned you were at the board yesterday, this Catholic school board?
Yes.
So what happened at the board? What was
Well, the
there?
Catholics, that was actually because the Catholic school board had a staff report coming, preparing the board for giving notice to childcare programs that the childcare occupancy grant was going to end. And I was there to just urge them to not drop the ball on the, just not. We've got three levels of government, the province, the city, and the school board, and you would think that three levels of government can make it 3 times as great in the organizing, but there's so much overlap, and there's so much sort of one directive tripping up another that people get confused. So the school board was ready to hand out its letters to childcare programs, giving them 1 year's notice on the rent, the occupancy grant. But just 2 days ago at the CDRC committee, that committee decided to ask council in July, I hope I'm not speaking out of term, but it was a public meeting, to put that occupancy grant back into the budget for next year, because it's not, like, you can't take 35 million from the province and then start.
But do you mean the school board put the money in the budget?
No, the school board was preparing to prepare its childcare programs for life after the grant, or after the occupancy grant. So I was there to try and urge them, don't move so fast, because CDRC sent a different message to city staff. So my message from all of this is just like, don't anybody take $1 out of childcare. Please don't take $1 out of childcare. We've still only got 20% of the families that need childcare in care. So it doesn't even matter. Even if you get a 10% increase or a 20% increase, you still only got 24% of the families that need care. We've got a long way to go. And we really encourage every level of government to invest their money and every team of staff to work really to lift this up. We need a gold star, not just beside the province, but beside every level of government.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll take other any questions of staff on this item. We are on this item now. There's only the one deputy. So questions of staff. We'll begin with any committee members have questions. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm trying to get a better understanding of the amounts that are being assigned in recommendation 2. I think I get recommendation 1. There's a base increase of 6 million, and then the additional 2 million, the expansion at 34, and then they're clawing back the provincial wage enhancement program.
Right, the wage enhancement is not actually a clawback. They fund the actual costs. So this year, and it's by application from childcare operators. So this year, we received 1.47 million more than we needed. If the opposite had been true and we needed more than they had originally allocated, they would have provided more money to cover the gap.
Okay, we
That's
just didn't
a
need the money
balance.
that we had budgeted for. Okay. But then it's been allocated. I'm just trying to get the proportion of what's being allocated where. What's being allocated for subsidy, what's being allocated for special need, and what's being allocated between the per diem rate and operating grant.
Okay.
In general affordability.
So in terms of increased subsidies, that's the majority of the investment for now. It's $31 million for 2,100 subsidies. Those subsidies are slightly more expensive because it's the younger children. The 800,000 is to provide, as about 10% of children in the system have extra support needs. So that 837,000 is to ensure that we have the capacity in the communities to support childcares that are serving children with extra support needs. 1.44 million going to the general operating grant is to increase affordability. So it's base funding that operators receive that will help to reduce the costs that they have to put in their per diems. And then finally, we added 1.9 million to the line, the per diems that we pay to operators to ensure that we can pay actual costs.
Okay, so during the budget period, we reduced the amount we were budgeting for the transfer to operators from 2% to 1%.
Right, so this increases it to 1.7%.
But we were assured during that process that this wouldn't mean that anyone would go without any money.
Oh, no, nobody would go without any money. It means that the overall budget for per diems increased by 1%. In some cases, childcare costs in some agencies increased by more than 1%, and other cases by less, depending on expansion. So we occasionally will cap what we give those operators that increase by more than the inflationary amount, and this is to limit the number of caps we would have to install. But nobody would receive, everybody would receive their per diems. It's looking at eligible costs, and it just gives us a bit more flexibility to ensure the operators are getting the resources they need.
Okay, but then you get where I'm going here, because we were told that we wouldn't need that additional 1%. We shouldn't consider it a cut. But if people were applying for more, if we clearly need money for more, because you're asking for a 0.7 increase, then we could have been providing more money through that per diem program to cover eligible costs, right?
We could have been.
We could have been.
We could have been.
So during the budget 2017 budget process, when we asked would that represent less money going to childcare facilities, we were told that no, that money wasn't needed. Well, indeed it is needed because we're going to be giving more now.
So we were not giving less. We had budgeted for a 1% increase. We usually budget for a 2% increase. So there was more money in the pot. We anticipated, and we did say this at the budget process, that 2017 was a good year. If we had to cut back, it was the best year to do it to 1% because we were introducing the general operating grant, which would give operators more stability. Now that we have additional resources, it just gives us an opportunity for those operators that have expanded, especially ones that have expanded into younger children, to make sure we are covering their full cost.
But had we kept that rate at 2%, we
Then I
would have had
probably
more
would
than
not have.
enough money to cover that and perhaps put this $2 million into subsidies, put this $2 million into the general operating grant to raise that. That would have just meant more money going to childcare.
It would have, but I would not have met my target.
Ha. That's an important distinction to make. And when answering questions next year of why we had to reduce the amount of money that we were making available to childcare, rather than say, well, we've been allocating too much, we need to make sure that we know this money is being spent, and it's being spent on childcare, that any reduction in that amount will result in less money being spent on childcare.
So I think to clarify though, Councillor, we did not say that too much was going into it. We were trying to balance our budget. And we knew that with the general operating grant coming into effect, that there would be more flexibility with per diems.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Carroll next for questions.
Thank you. 'Cause these are questions in advance of some questions I'm going to raise when we get to the disposition of the surplus and the operating year end. But first of all, if you can just expand upon Councillor Layton mentioned it, but recommendation 1C, reduce the funding in provincial funding for the provincial wage enhancement program, which is fully funded by the province. So what's really happening there?
So this is the program where the province pays $2 an hour to all frontline employees in childcare and home childcare that make below $26.62, I think it is now. They fund the actual cost. So they give us an allocation based on the previous years. Operators apply. We review the applications, do the calculations, and then pay the actual costs. If last year they happened to give us $1.4 million more than we actually needed, had they given us $1.4 million less than we needed, they would have topped us up. So they always pay the actual cost. It's just a balancing thing, and it's just a flow through.
So unused funds get clawed back.
Right.
Basically. This is a clawback. So we're now seeing this enhanced investment, but will we have a similar situation there where it's use it or lose it?
We have to have invested the new $34 million by the end of 2018, which is why we have a recommendation that any under expenditure this year get moved into the reserve so we can ensure that it's invested next year. The reason they did that is because we did not get our allocations until May this year, so we're already halfway through the year.
Okay, and I was going to ask this question with respect to the surplus disposition, but I'll ask it here with respect to the investment being made here. These are provincially funded top-ups. But in our childcare strategy, is it a stated goal that if we get enhanced investment from the province, that we keep pace with that investment on the city side?
The growth strategy included a recommendation that was endorsed by Council that Council would contribute 20% of dollars for growth commencing in 2018, not in 2017, and the strategy was clear that there was no increased municipal investment in 2017 because we were already halfway through the year.
So in 2018's budget, we should see that 20% investment to match this new investment from the province.
We would be submitting that as a new and enhanced item, yes.
Well, a new and enhanced item, regardless of the fact that it is in fact policy that we do that. Okay.
It's
Thank you.
not part of our base at present.
Right, okay. So I'll follow up on that in item number 2.
Okay, Councillor Nunziata.
A question to Josie. So if I recall, Josie? Okay.
Yes, sorry.
When we
Councillor.
went to the budget, we, as far as the occupancy fees, we instructed the school board that we would give them, we put money back in, and we would give them 1 year to notify the parents. So what's the status on that? Because listening to the deputant, it looks like the school board now is not doing that,
You want me to?
because we were very clear.
So I'll start, and then maybe the GM can continue. So during the 17 budget process, there was a recommendation to eliminate the occupancy grant halfway through the year. That was amended by council to extend it to year end, to give the board time to provide notice to the various recipients of the occupancy grant. And so that's what council approved. So there's funding in the budget to year end, but it's to be eliminated starting at the beginning of 2018 based on the budget decision. The other day at our CDRC committee, there was a recommendation that the committee made directing the GM and the CFO to include it in the base for consideration, the 18 budget process. So that will be a recommendation going to council to think about the disposition differently for the 18 budget process.
But we were very clear during the budget process that to instruct the school boards, to instruct the parents. We were very clear on that, and we don't rescind a commitment that we made. So why would that happen?
We were clear, we're required to give 6 months' notice, which we would be giving at the end of this month.
Okay, so we can still give 6 months' notice.
We would give 6 months' notice, but we'd also indicate that there is now a motion going to council, and it will be dealt with at council in July.
So we can give them notice in July. They'll have less than 6 months.
Well,
Okay,
we will
yeah.
let them know.
Well,
in
we'll be
June.
less than 6 months. Well, okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to outside councillors. Councillor Davis has questions.
I just wanted to ask, the question of 20% contribution, council approved that we would make that contribution to match any provincial and federal dollars. Why would it not be in the base as opposed to being included as new and enhanced in the staff proposed budget?
So through you, Mr.
2018.
Chair, so there is no proposed budget yet. This
For
is all.
2018, I'm sorry.
2017, it's all 100% funded. For 2018,
2018.
we would bring that forward. It is an enhancement to service level. It will have the 80% provincial contribution funded, and then council will make a decision on how to fund its share of the 20%. Now that we have it based on the approval of the Child Care Master Plan report that went just like last cycle. It is still an expansion to service. You want to
You know what, we'll have this, I still don't know, when some things get decided by council, they get put in the budget.
So through you, Mr. Chair.
And some things just don't. And I'm really struggling to understand
So
when the gardener gets put in the budget because council decided, or when, these decisions get made, and it's not clear to me which ones are automatically included and which ones are not.
I'll try, and then Josie can supplement. So often things are approved. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes council has wording that directs us to include in the budget, and when that happens, we do that. That is very rare. More often than not, council requests that the city manager or the CFO consider including something. And then what we do is we look at all available funding, we look at priorities and see what we can accommodate. In the specific case of the gardener, we have heard repeatedly, we don't get on that in 6 years, we would have a problem.
We have
And
heard
with the
repeatedly,
lead
if we
time-
don't get on with childcare, we're not going to have
Counselor, let,
You know what, I don't want to debate, really, Mr. Chair, I don't want to
no, I
debate
understand.
the CFO, and so I'm
Anyway, that was
satisfied.
the rationale.
I'm satisfied with the answer, which is that discretion is exercised. Is what I'm-
thank you.
So but my questions have to do as well with, we did get an announcement on capital money, $1.6 billion of provincial capital money is coming, but we don't know how much Toronto will get yet. Is that the case?
That's correct.
And there's going to be a federal announcement, it said in the paper, next week on money from the federal government, so we're expecting some additional funding.
That's correct.
And you will be reporting in the fall with the revised strategy based on those funding. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
With updated cash flow and the growth strategy.
All right. So looking at these allocations and the allocations you're recommending here, you are putting $32 out of $34 million of new money into subsidies. When there still is a great deal of concern about affordability for families who aren't eligible for subsidies, and increasing the general funding of childcare to keep the lid and then reduce to 40% by 40%, which was in the strategy, fees for parents. How are we going to reduce fees for parents if we don't add more than that into the funding of the general operating grant?
The growth strategy had fees being reduced by 25 to 40% over 10 years. The way to reduce them is to continue to increase the general operating grant.
Right.
So as we get additional money, we will continue to increase that, and you will see in the report that we bring forward in the fall the projected cash flow in terms of how that will roll out over the 10 years.
So if we were to ask you to go out and consult with parents and to look at options around affordability to address that particular, slice of the parent population or families in Toronto who aren't eligible for subsidies but are still hard-pressed with high fees, you could come back to help inform your report in the fall.
We would do a short consultation, I have to say, given the limited time in the
Yes.
summer months, but we'd be happy to reach out to parents.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go to speakers of the item. Councillor Davis, outside councillors first. You get to speak first if you choose.
Okay, I thought it was the other way around.
No.
I'm flexible.
We do things a little bit differently at
I'm
budget.
flexible. I have a motion that Councillor Layton is going to move on my behalf, which reflects the questions I just asked the general manager, which is, could we go out and talk to parents and the childcare sector before the next report comes back that will refine the growth strategy for the City of Toronto? We have, as Jane Mercer said, we have had a good week in terms of announcements with respect to childcare. And this reflects what was in the provincial budget, that we will be receiving an additional $34 million. As with other programs in the past, this has been announced in the final year of their term. And so the expectations to deliver quickly were there, and there was some pressure to have us spend money within an even more constrained timeline. But they have agreed, the province, to allow us to spend this by the end of 2018. And so this report recommends putting it into a reserve, which is what is the responsible thing to do. It also commits significant additional funding to add fee subsidies. But the provincial government, despite the language that was used in their announcements that talked about universality and moving towards a broader program to serve all families, which is very consistent with our growth strategy, has given us some flexibility around affordability, and they are undertaking a review of the subsidy system so that we can look at changes to that system to enhance access for middle-income families. And I think that will be terrific, and I hope those changes can be done quickly because they require provincial legislative change. But in the meantime, parents are struggling, and we have to find ways to keep the lid on fees in the City of Toronto. They are totally, totally beyond the reach. As our study said, the affordability and demand study demonstrated beyond the reach of 75% of families in the City of Toronto. So our strategy said if we were to reduce fees by 25 to 40%, and we were able to create more spaces, we could serve up to half of the children in the city. And that is something that is embedded in our plan. And it's one of those situations where it's very exciting. We've got all this money, but now it's got to get spent and quickly. And I know that this division has the capacity to do that. And I'm very excited that we're going to see, I hope, some very significant change for families in the City of Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee member, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I went over and mentioned to the Mayor's office, I'm not sure we fully understood the impact of the announcement in relation to our policy and our plan with childcare, sufficient to address it this morning. I think we may need to go back over the numbers before executive and possibly before council to truly understand how we would keep pace with investment to the point that we've committed to as a council. I know there's resentment to addressing this on the morning of a regular business council meeting or business budget meeting on a Friday morning when people would like to just zip through this. So it's easy to be annoyed that we're talking about childcare once again, but I don't think there's anybody in this room that makes less than 70 grand. We're probably the lowest paid in the room, making 110, because on a budget committee meeting, you got a lot of executives, some of whom make a lot more than us. So to try and understand what it would be like if, even in a two-parent family, if even though you went to college, the job you earn, the job you're doing with your college certificate may only be earning mom 50 grand and dad 60 because he's a man. And now those two people who between the two of them aren't even making what we as councillors make as individuals have to come up with the childcare full fee for 2 kids. And it's more than what they pay in rent or mortgage. So it sounds annoying that we have to talk about it in a budget committee, and maybe it feels like it isn't even a budget item. But it's about to be, because we are heading into reviewing 2018, and we've set a target to reduce again. But as in housing, as in transit, as in everything else, when the province makes an investment and we plug our holes with their investment instead of keeping pace with them, then none of the things they've promised or that we promised when we adopted our plan are going to happen. And they're going to be ticked off at us again. And then the mayor's going to start a program of we're mad at you, and they're going to send us letters from ministers saying you might be mad at us, but here's how much money we gave you, and you just plugged holes with it. So we do have to wrap our head around the fact that while we set a reduction target, if they make a big investment and we can actually make a major economic development move by creating childcare so that both mom and dad, God forbid they be a single parent, can go to work and actually work their way up the ladder to where they might earn 70 grand or 80 or 90 or 110 like us, they have to not be worrying about who's taking care of my kid in the most expensive city in the country to live in. So it is a pain in the neck to talk about it on a Friday morning, but I really think you need to look back at the numbers of the announcement, and by executive, be able to tell executive committee and Mayor Tory whether or not this is a good news announcement this week or not on childcare? Are we going to invest and keep pace with it to the 20% that we promised so that it really is good news and there really are more children in care in 2018? That's my rant, and I'm sorry to do it on a Friday morning when you're in a hurry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Layton next.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll move the motion on behalf of Councillor Davis that City Council requests the General Manager of Children's Services to undertake consultation with parents in the childcare sector to inform the revised growth strategy in preparation for her report to Community Development and Recreation Committee in the fall, and include the consultation options for addressing affordability of childcare fees in Toronto. So being, I believe, the only member of this committee with a child in care, I think it's important to reflect back on what Councillor Carroll and Councillor Davis had expressed, that it's really quite unfortunate that we went through a budget process, adjusted some numbers in order to meet a budget target, reducing the amount of money that would go to child care subsidies by way of the per diem rate, and now we're just filling that back in. If we want, and I know that the budget chief has a press conference later today, I sincerely hope a member of the media gallery doesn't say, well, you just used provincial money for childcare to backfill and achieve a tax reduction or less of a tax increase in your 2017 budget. If I was a member of the media, that would be one of my first questions. And I hope you have a good answer for that, because I don't. And I don't know what that would be. We asked, and we just heard it, we asked for budget we gave budget direction that said, come in at minus 2.6. Is that the number? Minus 2.6. Not all divisions did. I don't believe childcare did. But they came in back with a reduction of the per diem rate from 2 to 1% and told us that, well, we wouldn't need the money. Well, now we're putting 0.7, essentially $2 million back into that to get us back to 1.7, because apparently we did need the money. I see the need for subsidies on a daily basis in my work here. I got a call from a parent, and I reached out to Elaine and her team, and I think we actually accommodated something for these two parents that missed the threshold by 50 cents a day that they could afford, where they would get a subsidy and where they wouldn't. And the complicated bit is the city's agreement with the subsidy actually has a lower rate, so they actually paid much, much more when they were on the regular rate. And it's like the whole system's very complicated, and which is why I'm so thankful that Councillor Davis holds my hand through some of this. So I see the need for this subsidy, and we do. We need to make childcare most affordable for those who can't afford it, for those people making under $70,000 a year or less, because I don't know how those families are making it if they don't have a subsidy. My infant care was $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month. You guys all get paid the same amount of me. I'm not independently wealthy. I worked for a not-for-profit before this, barely had 2 dimes to rub together. Like that equated over the course of my little daughter Phoebe's childcare, like 5 years really, when it's intense childcare. That's like adding 2 years to my mortgage essentially, because like many people, we don't have much of a buffer in our monthly budget to absorb $24,000 a year. We own our home. Thankfully, we own our home in Toronto. We bought just before it took off like crazy. But $24,000 a year is a lot of money for a family, and that's on the full fare. So we do have to also look at that general affordability across the board, because that brings it down and makes these centres more saleable for everyone. It will help the bottom line for new centres that are trying to open up that don't have subsidized spots, like the new ones will be in Ward 19, because we have met our equity level. We're far exceeding it, so we're not in line for many new subsidies. So I think it's important for us to look at across the system on how we can increase affordability to everyone. This is why I'm very happy that Councillor Davis brought this to our attention, and I hope that you'll help pass this motion. It's just asking for consultation and consideration of general affordability. And if Elaine comes back and says the best way of tackling affordability is through subsidy and deepening the subsidy and providing more, then fine. But let's have this dialogue about different ways of achieving an affordable system.
Councillor Campbell next.
Well, I think there's no question that affordability in childcare is an issue, particularly for single parents and for the working poor. I don't know what a consultation of this nature is going to achieve. We're going to hear from a lot of people that we need to provide more subsidies. There's no direction to staff as to how much consultation we should be giving or we should be conducting. It seems like an exercise in coming to a self-fulfilling prophecy where we're going to hear from people how they want the city to give more. I think that the city does have a role to play, of course, in childcare, but you know, childcare, like healthcare and like education, I think should be universal, should have a universal standard. And when 25% of the funding, or 20% of the funding, 25% of the funding comes from the city, not all municipalities have the same resources to provide the standard of care equally across the province. So I guess, you know, I don't know, I'm going to put, I'll support the motion, although with reservations, because I have confidence that our staff will know what to do in terms of consultation, how much to do, but I think we're probably going to hear a lot about what we already know. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other speakers to the item? Okay, we'll do the amendment first by Councillor Layton on the consultation. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Item as amended. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, on to the next item. Will do BU 33.11, final operating budget variance for Toronto Police Services year ending December 31st. We have a speaker on the item, Miguel Avila Velarde. Oh, we're doing the deputations first. So we do the deputation. So we have a deputation. So we're doing we always do the deputations first. And then we'll get to the agenda.
Good morning. Happy Friday, everybody. I'm going to be talking again about childcare. No, just kidding. But you know what? This is good news in this report because apparently they have found surplus $9.5 million last year, and now they're asking us, well, we have cars that need to be repaired, so we're asking some money for that purpose. And then if we have this report, the modernization of the Toronto Police. They're asking money for that as well. Wouldn't it be more logical to transfer all that money towards childcare spaces? Because those are the priorities in my books. Housing, transit, those are my priorities. And I asked this committee to look into other alternatives that perhaps may help you to make decisions today. I have some ideas. I wrote a letter to the city manager and asking him, what is the current level, what is the funds that the insurance companies pay to people who go to court and fight off the Toronto Police? And there is no number as to how much money people, residents of Toronto, like Andrew Luku, the family of Sami Yatin will receive from compensation for crimes made by Toronto police officers. So I had this nice idea. Why don't we dip into the legal liabilities reserve, of the City of Toronto stands at $1.7 million, and the citywide insurance reserve fund that stands at $10.1 million. So all those claims are paid by the city, by the way. So I'm going to put it up there for you to see. So I'm not lying, and I'm making this up. And Stephen Conforti from the city manager or the city legal department can confirm that information. So in order to make our police officers more accountable of their, because we expect high levels of accountability, right? So if we take that money away from the pool of funding, then they will say to themselves, you cannot screw up again. because the money that pays off our indemnification for victims of crime is coming from that reserve that is paid by Toronto taxpayers. We know that, right? You know that, right? All this insurance money comes from the funds of Toronto taxpayers. Another thing I will suggest, why don't we ask the police union? They always claim that the city is going to run in chaos if we start funding the police. Why don't they ask the police union to contribute? If they want money for the modernization of the police, we can have this discussion today. So risk management is, that will be my suggestion. Also, we can, I can teach some of the councilors who always ask questions at City Council, which service would you like to cut? You know, we are trying to avoid talking about the police. You know, Councilor Fletcher, Councilor Davis, Councilor Layton, all these nice councilors always ask, do not touch the police, because we want to save the money for other things. So I don't know if I'm being so personal in this matter, but I've been listening to the Andrew Luku inquiry, and it really makes me sad that that family in where they're from, in other parts of the world, they will not receive a single dime. And just makes me wonder why we should help the modernization of the Toronto police. Why can they find efficiencies between the service? I don't know, maybe lay off a few people? That would be a great idea. Come on, this is always a topic of discussion. This is one of the budgets that is untouchable. It's where, no, don't mess with the Toronto police because we are afraid of them. And I'm not afraid of them, come on. You know, I always come to the police board, and I tell them like it is. I tell them like it is. If people don't have the guts to say it, I tell it. Well, that will be all for now. If you have any questions, I'm sitting over there in my corner. That's my office. Thank you.
Thank you, McGill. Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, on the item, any questions of staff? Seeing none, speakers, no. Councilor Campbell, you want to move it? Oh, hold on a sec.
Just it was one quick question.
Okay, we can entertain one quick.
My apologies. So we're setting up a reserve fund, right? And then we're going to draw from that reserve fund. When are we filling the reserve fund? I heard we're setting up a reserve fund, and there was money from last year that went to the general reserve, and now we're apportioning it out back to the police reserve, right?
In essence, that's correct. So through you, Mr. Budget Chief, there was some budget pressures in the 2017 budget to fund additional fleet and fleet replacements. We took those monies out of the budget knowing that because of the transformations that were going and the police weren't hiring, that there would be a surplus. So we were able to take the budget pressure out of the operating budget, knowing that we could fund it this way through the surplus. So, and we're doing the two things, the equipment pressures and also funding, putting aside monies in a reserve so that they could have funds to do the restructuring, which will bring permanent savings going forward in the budget.
Okay, so we're increasing the police budget from a reserve.
We are actually avoiding future budget pressures by taking this surplus, putting it in reserve, and using that monies to pay for certain pressures that won't have to be put in the budget. This is actually a smart thing to do.
But we'll still have to be paid for it, right?
Yes, oh, absolutely. I mean, fleet vehicles, police cars get old, they need to be replaced. Now we're going to fund it through this means versus adding it to the tax levy. This is avoiding future budget pressures and creating reserve from which we could do innovation and future savings. So two things.
But that reserve's being funded by
The surplus.
the surplus.
Their surplus, yes. Their savings.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Seeing none, Councilor Campbell, you're going to move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, now we'll go back to BU 33.2, the operating variance report for the 12-month period ending December 31st. Councilor Layton, you held that down?
Yes, sorry, there was one, what number is it, 6? 8?
2, BU 33.2.
Oh, 33.2. I believe it's Councillor Davis that had a question about the operating.
So I just
Okay.
wondered,
I will just, first of all, Council, I just want to see if there are any committee members who have questions first. Seeing none. We started, just to let you know, Councillor Burnside, we started this, I guess, process a couple of years ago where we allow committee members to ask questions first, then outside committee member. Then speaking, we don't have a choice. It is actually, we have to do outside speakers and inside speakers. So that was a choice. Any committee can do that. The Budget Committee made that decision a number of years ago to do questions first as opposed to outside. So that's why we do that. Anyway, so we're doing, yeah, we're doing the no, we're doing, yeah. Okay, so, Councillor Kerr, we're on BU 33.2, operating variance report for the 12-month period. Okay, so we'll begin with Councillor Carroll.
Okay, and I'm paperless, so I'm trying to get to the table of how we are dispositioning the surplus, and I'll be there soon. In this version, I haven't got it paginated yet. Okay, I'll be there in 2 shakes. So basically what I'm asking about is a follow-on of what we were talking about in childcare. In terms of once we've got past the 75% for the surplus, the remaining, the largest amount is going into the tax rate stabilization reserve, and then the rest are going to things which by and large I remember them, they're either things like the police modernization reserve, there's a transaction today, but a lot of them are things discussed at the end of the year, vehicle equipment reserves and fleet reserves and things like that were things that they were sort of efficiencies, so it makes sense that we put them back there. But I'm wondering if it wouldn't be wise, out of the large amount that's going to property tax stabilization reserve, and maybe you could comment on this, that we do have some in the childcare stabilization reserve until we understand truly the impact of the investments and what we might have to do to keep pace, our 20% and enhancing facilities and this new home child care component. Would it be wise to rethink this given the recent announcement?
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair. So actually, while the $8 million does sound like a lot of money, it really isn't in the grand scheme of things when you look at some of the risks that we have in the operating budget. We have a council-approved policy to try to have the tax stabilization reserve at 1%. It's below that number. This does bring it to 1%. And if you recall, both at the end of the 2016 and the 2017 budget process, we did tap several $1 million out of this reserve to fund priorities in the operating budget. Secondly, if you recall, in the 2017 child care budget this year, we've got it fully sustainable in that it does not rely on any child care reserve draws. So that was a major accomplishment.
Yes.
So we're not drawing on the child care reserve. If you're
in the current world.
in the 2017 budget.
Yes.
Also, we knew that the previous report was coming, the one that we just did on child care item 4, and if you note, the last recommendation in that report says any unused funds automatically go to the child care reserve. We know there will be some challenges to try to spend all that money in years, so we knew that. So I also know that there will be money going into the child care reserve. So because of all those confluence of situations, yes, because that will be an automatic resolution transfer, the last item in the child care report, item 3, I think.
Right.
Recommendation 3. So that was the rationale for coming up with the disposition that you do see in front of you in Table 5.
But that's the provincial amount going into the reserve. So when it came back out to be invested in childcare, our 20% wouldn't be there. So we're burdening future years by not having the matching amount going into that reserve at the same time, are we not?
So in 2018, we'll have to come up with funding for our share. That's absolutely correct. We did it in 2017. If childcare is a priority around the council table, then council can decide to increase the funding and do that.
So this is where if I can ask one more follow-up question, Mr. Chair, this is where I have some sympathy for our guests' questions. I don't understand why that last statement is an if. That is council's priority. Council unanimously supported a plan, supported a thing. Is that not also policy like our reserve policies? And therefore, why does that not automatically generate a report? Do I need to move a motion before you would include in the 28 budget submission from this division? What would it take to put the matching funds there in the appropriate time frame? Or because it's not an if, because council has said childcare is their priority, will that not automatically be generated as a report by the announcements of the province?
So let me just address the reserve portion of that question first. The child care budget, the matching 20%, will require tax-supported permanent annual funding, not reserve funding. The
Right, which council said is okay.
So in the master plan approved last cycle.
By council.
By council. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the recommendation verbatim, but it did make it subject to the provincial, and I believe there was also federal funding. I'm getting nods from Elaine. So all that will get thrown into the budget hopper. It is a priority. We've heard that loud and clear. The master plan was approved by council, and we'll go forth on that basis.
So because the subject 2 has materialized, the report will materialize.
That's the last question. Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Toronto Water had a surplus of 90 million. How does that compare to the year prior?
That is a very large number for Toronto Water, and Lou is here, and I'll have him explain it. Most of it's revenue-driven.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is actually the largest surplus that Toronto Water's had in my career, and a lot of it was tied directly. There's $58 million of that is tied to extra revenue above forecast, and a significant chunk of that additional revenue, I think about 38 million of it, was tied to metered consumption, because we had an extremely dry, hot summer. First time we've had that in many, many years. So the best way I can describe the overall 2016 year for Toronto Water, the best conditions for us to generate a big surplus are having a mild winter, so few water main breaks, so lesser expenses, and then having a hot, dry summer, which increases our revenues. We had both last year, so we had everything go right to generate the largest volume increase we've had.
Okay, so does Toronto Water ever give consideration to maybe lowering the rates that we're charging people in subsequent years, given the fact that we've just taken so much out of their pockets?
Through you, Mr. Chair, every year we examine the 10-year rate model. But what primarily drives the rate calculation is the capital program. It is not the annual operating costs. Over the years, the operating component of it has remained relatively stable, slight increases. It is the accelerated capital program that's been a commitment of council for over a decade. That really drives the rate increases. And so we do model that. We take the surplus. As you can see, the recommendations in this report are to put the surplus into the capital reserve with a minor component, $7.5 million, into our fleet reserve, which addresses some upcoming fleet issues. Then we put that into the rate model and we recalculate our needs.
So it says, in the report says, we'll need to replace 326 vehicles at a total cost of $30 million.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is a
Can't be right.
what I call a hard statistical model calculation for a reserve, but it is an accurate number. The question is, though, as you fine-tune it, because this is seeing it coming down the line in the next few years.
Sorry, can I just interject?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, 326 vehicles for $30 million. That's $92,000 a vehicle. Did I do my calculation right or wrong?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have some pieces of that fleet are upwards of $600,000 alone for one unit. Those are the large Vector trucks that we use for excavation. So that's what skews the total number. So some of our equipment, backhoes, large backhoes, so we may call it fleet. It's not pickup trucks and
Well, thank heavens for that.
okay, so this is big equipment. There are pickup trucks and vehicles in there as well. But really what skews the numbers is the heavy equipment that we purchase.
But that heavy equipment lasts, you know, that stuff lasts decades, doesn't it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. And the big push of the equipment was purchased in 2005, 2006. If you follow and this is why I say this is the mathematical calculation, if you follow the best practices of when a piece of equipment should be replaced, we have certain guidelines. What we then do is look at the run hours on the vehicle. We will do analysis, and we can extend vehicles, and we do that quite frequently. So we will defer the purchase of new pickup trucks if they have low mileage and run them longer. So that analysis happens every year.
So, okay, a couple of quick questions then. So how is it that we had $32 million in lower expenses for salaries? I mean, the water kept flowing. I don't know if anybody noticed a disruption of service. We were obviously short-staffed, but the water still flowed. So that makes me think that maybe we're at an appropriate staffing level.
Through you, Mr. Chair, $32 million wasn't just staffing. The $32 million was all expenditures combined. Salaries and benefits surplus was $8.8 million. There was another $5.5 million in utilities, primarily savings in electricity with the implementation of some of our efficiency measures that we put in place in Toronto Water. In addition to that, there was another $5.5 million saved on the fact
Okay, I
that we
got
didn't
8
have to
seconds.
do
Can I
repairs.
just ask my last question then? So at what point would the surplus reach a tipping point where we would actually say to residents of Toronto, next year we're actually going to reduce the rate beyond the level at which we had scheduled to reduce the rate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, when we look at the capital program in place, that we aren't having to defer projects, because we're in the process right now, we're preparing the 2018 budget, and as we usually report every year, it is not a situation of trying to manage the next 1 or 2 years of capital. We're fine there because we have reserves. It's when we look at it year 6, 7, and 8, because we have some very, very large programs that are about to start construction. We always end up on our first cut of being in the red, and we have to defer some projects to make it balance out so we don't deplete the reserve completely. So if we don't have that happen, we can come back and say we don't need as much money in a rate.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata.
Yeah, so just on that point, so any deferred items that we've deferred, you would bring them forward then, and you would fund those deferred projects, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. That's what we've done in the past, where we've had to put in some large deferrals in the past, and then when we had a surplus, we were able to re-accelerate some projects, put them back into an earlier year. So we're constantly moving projects forward and backward in our 10-year plan based on the availability of cash flow.
Okay, parking authority, there's a favorable variance of over 6 million? Okay. Who's here from parking authority?
I don't think there's many agency staff at all.
They're not here?
Well, Steve Conforti is pretty good at answering questions.
Okay,
give
so
him a shot.
there's been an increase in off-street parking revenues. There's been an increase in off-street parking revenues downtown garages. And then on page 3, there was a gain sale of car parks at car park 650 at 22 John. Is that 22 John Western or 22 John downtown?
For 10 points.
We'll have to get back to
Through
you.
the chair, I'm not sure if, we'll get back to you.
I knew that was going to be a trick question.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you. So if I read this report correctly, there was a surplus overall of 150 million, 187 million, 188 million. How does that compare to previous few years?
So the last couple years, we've been around 120, 130 million, and the surplus had been tracking actually downwards since 2013, since I've been here. But the surplus has been, north of 200 million, and even, I believe, we hit north of 300 million when we were doing in-year constraint measures. So the surplus since 2012 has been tracking down. This is the first annually. This is an increase over last year, though.
Still hard to explain to people when we were cutting 600,000 out of long-term care for staffing.
I can provide a quick, simple
in
increase,
reserve
explanation.
that we would still have 120 million in surplus, but I won't go there. So of the allocations that you're putting into reserves, there is a table that has a Building Code Act Service Improvement Reserve Fund, Development Application Review Reserve Fund, Council Transition Reserve, I kind of know what that is. Did we not already allocate sufficient funding for these things in the budget?
So these
Why
are...
Yeah.
These are either legal or standing approvals and directions by council to make these transfers. So these are all what I would call the pre-approvals, either by legislation, such as the Building Code Act.
Okay, so the top half.
Or council has already approved that these things happen.
That they would
For
come out of
example,
the year-end reserve?
Yes. They
Okay,
come off the top, so.
okay. The other ones that you have decided...
And just as a point of just clarification, what we just approved on the childcare, it will go in this top half in 2017.
Right, okay. That's very helpful. The bottom half of the table are the ones that you've allocated.
Correct.
So I'm wondering what the Innovation Reserve Fund is for. 1.75 million.
So if you recall, at council, in the 2017 budget, council approved a motion directing staff and the city manager to come up with a plan for a 10% reduction in non-union and management. That's going to take some either technological improvements, could have some restructuring involved, some consulting. So we've had for a number of years this innovation reserve, which we tap to try to find or to fund studies and restructuring. We needed to top it off. Top it up, sorry.
So you're adding to the fund that's going to restructure.
Right.
And that is to achieve the 10% reduction in management. The Workforce Reduction Reserve Fund of 2.8 million, is that a complementary addition to this reserve to match the restructuring?
No, so if you
innovation
recall, in 2017 budget, there were a number of staff reductions. I believe about 3/4 of the FTE reductions in the base were on vacancies, some were not. Some were actually positions that were filled and that will require severances, so this is to fund that.
So we did not budget for the severances in the budget?
No, because they are one-time, you don't want to tax for them. So it's more appropriate to fund a one-time expenditure against a one-time source of funding, such as the surplus.
Okay. And lastly, this is the one I'm surprised is so small, and that's the Housing Stabilization Reserve. Why would we not have really pumped up the Housing Stabilization Reserve? If we know absolutely that there's huge pressure there, why wouldn't we have put a significant amount in that reserve?
So again, this came from a council-approved resolution directing me to consider putting the entire housing surplus into, or the surplus from the program, back to the reserve. We did have a surplus. The surplus was $3.8 million.
Right.
I concur. I'm recommending that we put the entire surplus back into the reserve.
No, but why would...
So then the question...
You've allocated the housing surplus.
Yes.
Last
You've
question.
not allocated any more of the $188 million surplus to the housing reserve, and I'm asking you why you wouldn't have added more.
So Housing needs sustainable funding, and that was an issue in the 2017 budget.
Right, 30 million.
Did increase the TCHC budget by 18%, 37 million. It will continue to be an issue. In 2018, we have the Tenants First report that's going to Executive Committee, which is kind of laying down the seeds and directing us to come back on a interim plan for 2018 and 2019. So we're going to try to address that through those means and the budget, and had other pressures to fund.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions?
16 surplus.
Seeing none, we'll go to speakers to the item. Outside councillors, we have one here. Councillor Davis, want to speak?
Just as a follow-up to that, I really do believe we should have put more into the housing reserve. And I just think, there are other reserves here that maybe could have had less. I don't know. I just think that that's a reserve that should have been richer in anticipation of the pressures we're going to face. It's shocking, once again, that the land transfer tax has continued to grow, and we still have not implemented the harmonization, which is going to give us even more money. I can't remember how much more the harmonization is going to give us. Another 70? Another 70 million. And it's always kind of a wake-up call for me every time this report comes in June, that we spend months and months and months and months fighting over $1 million here and $1 million there around service levels. And then we come back with these very large surpluses. I know if you take out the land transfer tax, it represents only a 0.7% variance, which is small, considering the size of the budget. So, in fact, I probably should congratulate you for the variance being not as wide as it could have been. Yes, so I did.
Thank you.
Just though to comment on water, I didn't ask the general manager how many years we underestimated the revenue from water. That created a pressure in our budget. In fact, every single year, I'm sure he can attest to this, I would say, can't you estimate the volume of water use to accurately project our revenues? Because we were consistently under-projecting the revenues from water use, from water. So the fact that we have a surplus is unusual, and it's an anomaly, and it can go now into capital and to the kinds of things we need to invest in. So now that we have nixed the stormwater charge, and as the EAs come back from all of the basement flooding areas in all of your wards that are not yet included in the budget, because they're not, there's dozens more of them to come, we will not have the capacity to build all of that infrastructure. So anyway, I hope that we will be revisiting that tax in the future. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll's next.
Thank you. Councillor Davis asked a question that I think sort of slipped by everyone that is key, very key in terms of how this report speaks to 2018, I believe. She asked the CFO about all of these reserves that we're dispositioning the surplus into. We were hearing the answers item by item. Well, this just brings it up to where it should be. And Councillor Davis asked, shouldn't that have been part of the budget process? And this is where, this is key to 2018, because this is where any kind of slowing down or any kind of flattening out of the prices in the real estate market is going to kill us. We have had so many years now of knowing that revenue is coming in, and yet setting tight targets, overly tight targets in our budgets, that now the surplus transactions at the end of the year have their own tightness, their own constraint. And if there's any kind of market problem, they're going to have their own little panic. Just the surplus transactions that we do here. Because staff have been for a long time, and I'm not casting aspersions, it's pressure that we put them under by setting the targets that we've set again and again. They have been producing the efficiencies as close as they can get to goal, but they have also often balanced the budget. We often hear in our informal reviews, I should be putting this into vehicle or equipment. I should be putting this into the various reserves that they're supposed to include the contributions in their budget. They have often said, I can get to target if I under-contribute here, but don't worry, I'm going to, through the year, keep an eye on that, and hopefully by the end of the year, make that contribution that in all prudent financial planning should be there. And that's how they've been ending the year in a condition that wins us our awards in financial planning. And that's the one thing that's not going to be possible if the market fails us in any way. If you look at this surplus, if you take away all the good luck, you're left with 0.7%. 0.7% on a $12 billion budget, and that's all the surplus is left. Not only is that really tight financial control and really compliant and adhering staff across the board, all over the place, there is a major effort on the part of staff to come in at a 0.7% tight surplus. That is comical in comparison to the kinds of budgeting and funding and balancing that goes on in the private sector. To just tight, just barely meet all your goals and have only 0.7% left, that means we are really down there now. We're any kind of market problem, and we're toast. And so while we're doing up all these reserves, that's why I think you hear us zeroing in on them tonight, this morning, wanting them to be whole, worried about the ones that aren't on the list, because there won't be any way to get to target and be anywhere near what we know in our own policies or in our financial planning staff's good advice should be in each of the reserves. We're just not going to be able to do it, and we're going to stop winning those awards that we win in all those associations. So that's why we've been a little fine-tooth combing and are looking at these year ends. It's because we know already the real estate market, for one, and we know that the real estate market really collapses, all the other parts of the market follow thereafter. So we really are going to have to pay attention when we're in our informal reviews this summer and early fall. We've got to look at not using these to balance out to the target that we set, because if we do, there'll be no way to make them whole at the end of 2018, I dare say. Thank you, Mr. Chief.
Thank you. Any other speakers? No. Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Campbell, do you?
No, I don't need to speak.
Okay. All in favor of the item? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Next. Okay, did that one. BU 33.8, adjustment to the 2017-26 capital budget plan for transportation. Councillor Layton,
Sure, it's just very quickly. Section in the summary, the third line about how this is to be funded, Section 37, contributions from Planning Act reserve funds. What's that? And where'd that Section 37 money come from? Is that? Yes.
For you, Mr. Chair, that's money that's been collected for the North York Service Road.
Pardon me? Sorry?
It's money that's been collected through Section 37 for the North York Service Road.
So not from specific sites or from several sites?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's been collected through several sites for the North York Service Road.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's fine. I'll move the staff recommendations.
Okay, Councillor Layton has moved staff recommendations. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next item is BU 33.10, Toronto Public Library Capital Budget 2018 to 26. Councillor Campbell, you held that down.
A couple of questions. So I gather, through you to the CFO, that owing to the renovation of the North York Library, they've realized $4 million in savings, and they want to plow that into capital. So the question is, how could they not have known that they would have been saving $4 million when they had a schedule of closure?
I can respond to that. Through the chair, as part of the 2015 capital budget, phase 1 of North York Central project was approved. We started work on phase 1 in 2016, and then towards the end of 2016, we closed the library to do the major demolition work for a short-term closure, and that was the plan at the time. Through the budget process for 2017, we asked for funding for phase 2 for the project. That was approved in February of this year. And so that gave us an opportunity to look at the whole project now that we had funding for phase 1 and phase 2. And we tried to find opportunities to shorten the closure overall and to minimize the disruption and perhaps spend money more wisely in getting the whole project done. So a decision was made to extend the closure for the rest of this year. And
when was that decision made?
that decision was made in May
A year
to
ago.
extend the closure.
May of this year?
Yes, because we had to wait till after the council approved the budget for phase 2, and that then gave us assurance that we had full funding now, and now let's revisit the whole project to accelerate the project. So we were able to, our board approved now extended closure towards the end of the year. That then would result in accelerating the project, spending more money in 2017 of about $4 million more, and that savings from the closure then could be redirected towards spending. And so, as a result,
sorry to interject, but
Yeah.
so basically, you're pulling this money pulling this money forward to complete the project earlier.
that's correct. And we're funding it through the savings.
And then how then do you intend to fund the increased cost for when you open earlier than you would have planned? Because you're moving the project, the closure will be reduced.
Right.
Correct? And so the operating will be longer, and you will be operating sooner than planned.
The cost of operating the branch is in the base budget for that project, and so it's already in the budget.
So how could that be? Because you only decided in May that you were closing the facility, and so it was only in May that you knew that you were closing it for a shorter duration, and hence would have known that you're going to be operating for a longer period of time or sooner.
No, in May, we decided to extend the closure for the rest of the year. It was originally intended to reopen earlier. So in May, we extended the closure, and that generated savings in 2017. So in 2018, when we reopen, we have that budget to run the branch.
And phase 1 is how far along is phase 1?
Phase 1 deals mainly with the second to the fifth floor, the first to the fifth floor. It's well along the way. We are confident that we'll reopen most of the library early next year. And the major demolition work will be done during the closure, and that's good for the public and good for the construction people to get the work done as soon as possible.
How much of your expenditure is AODA related?
Good question, but we will address all the AODA needs of the branch during the whole project. The project is a multi-year project. It's about a 3-year project now, and we've shortened the time frame by a full year.
But, I mean, so in terms of the overall capital cost, do you have an estimate as to how much is related to, I mean, it's not that I'm kind of curious, it's not
I don't think it's a huge amount because it's a large library. We have elevators on every floor and so on.
Okay.
But, you know, there are new AODA requirements for size of washrooms and so on, and we'll address all of those requirements.
Thank you for the answers.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just Councillor Davis?
It raises the question of AODA, thank you. For the smaller branches, Have you done an assessment of the anticipated costs of achieving AODA compliance in all of the library branches?
We have done a building condition assessment on all our branches, and AODA is a component, and so we are aware of the backlog and the funding necessary, but as you're aware, the AODA requirements change all the time, and we have to respond to that, and we have more work to do as we update our building condition assessments.
No, but have you isolated the costs that are specific to AODA compliance?
Yes, by branch, yes.
By branch?
Yes.
So you don't know overall, though, what it is?
Yes, we do.
Oh.
I just don't have it right.
Just don't
with
have
me.
it, okay. Because I know that we have like $250 million of AODA requirements that,
It is part of the capital budget submission. It is a requirement this year, and we'll be addressing it in the submission.
oh, so are we, Mr. Budget Chief, asking for budgets to be submitted to identify AODA capital costs separately this year? That's very good. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Seeing no other questions, any speakers to the item? Councillor Nunziata. Moving the item, okay, moving the item, I apologize. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, I believe we're on to the new items now. On the pink, the new items. So we're on to the staff complement and legal services temporary positions for expropriations work, which is number 30. So are there any? Oh, we'll have to work on that, Councillor. Are there any questions on this? Councillor Nunziata.
So this is for TTC, correct? Yeah. Okay. So is this, it sounds like there's a lot of expropriation happening. Is this part of the line, the Metrolinx, part of Metrolinx line, and the work that they're doing, or what, is this separate from the, like, why do we have so many now? Is there something happening?
So there's,
Other than the Metrolinx
so through you, Madam Speaker, there's no one here from the TTC. But I know that on the Metrolinx one, we have a separate team that worked on Eglinton Crosstown, will be working on Finch and Shepherd LRTs, and they're fully funded by Metrolinx. There's also a need for TTC-owned projects, such as there will be a property expropriations and property acquisitions needed for the Scarborough Subway extension. So I'm not sure which ones these are related to. My sense, these ones would be related more towards just the TTC projects, because the Metrolinx projects have its own team funded by Metrolinx.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers to the item? I do have a quick amendment, just a technical amendment that staff gave me. If I could put it up, it says City Council increased legal services 2017 approved operating budget by $153,000 gross and $0 net. Again, just technical to polish it off. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, the last item is the new item, Facilities, Real Estate, and Environment and Energy, 2000 Capital Budget, Ward 38705, Progress Building Improvements. Councillor Campbell, you had some questions on that?
I do. So why do we have this building?
Sorry, Rob, I didn't realize. So we've owned this building for numerous years with the school board, so from before amalgamation. At the time, the city was wanting to put in a park potentially in the future and a school. Those plans are still, I'll say, in the works and in effect. So the city continues to lease out the property.
Sorry, what are the plans that are on the books? This is like a warehouse, is it?
It's an industrial building that has, I'll say, many industrial units.
Okay.
So we lease it out at market rate.
Why haven't we sold
for
it?
our costs?
So through you, Mr. Chair, why has the building not been sold?
Because we still have plans to have a park and a school in this location.
A park and a school. and the TDSB has declining enrollment and isn't really looking to add schools, has the TDSB signaled that they're looking to add a school in this area?
Yes, they have.
When?
Numerous times throughout the years, they've indicated they are still interested in maintaining this site for a school.
So is this property owned by the Toronto Lands Corporation?
No, it's owned by us
Or it's
and the school board.
Right.
Toronto Lands Corporation manages it, I believe, on behalf of the school board. So it's a 50/50% ownership by each party. So it's not like we own half of the land and they own half of the land. It's a 50/50 partnership.
And, okay, so it's a 50/50 partnership. They say that one day they're going to build a school there, at which point this building would be demolished, I would presume.
That's correct.
Right. So, and we're holding on to the building so that we can do a park there.
Yes, and we're in discussions with the school board to see if we can release part of the site for a park on the east side of the site. So they're looking at that now to see if they can release that portion. So if it doesn't affect their potential school site, then they're going to be giving us a decision on that soon.
Also, if I may just add, not all of the buildings will be demolished. Some of the buildings will be maintained. And also, at last council meeting, council directed us and directed staff to report back on the feasibility of establishing a community hub on the property.
Well, everyone would like a community hub. So we're looking to take money from the Parkland Reserve to pay for a building that'll eventually be demolished when the TDSB builds a school.
No. So
well, sorry, through you. If I heard correctly, he said the building would be demolished.
As I've said, we've been asked to look at the feasibility of a community hub. Some of the buildings on the property will be demolished. Some will not. So we do not know if this particular building will be demolished yet. Further to this direction to look at a community hub on the property. The slight nuance that makes this kind of unique is the lease is on, generally, parkland dedication funds is what are the revenues that go in our parkland reserves. This particular reserve also had the lease revenues from the property into the reserve for future improvements on the property.
So, okay.
That's why we're saying to use that reserve.
And so what?
$1.8 million of revenues from the reserve put in there. If you were to fund the full $500,000 or $520,000 on the project, there would still be $1.3 million of lease revenues in that reserve.
But we're basically looking, correct me if I'm wrong, we're basically looking to fix up this building, which may one day be torn down, possibly, and we're leasing it out at below market rent to an organization that, I don't know where they are at present, the autistic group that's mentioned here, that is not presently in this facility.
Correct. The BMR proposal was just approved at the last council, and they're scheduled to come in for, it's either the end of the year or the beginning. I think it's December 31st.
Do we know where they are now?
Yes, they're in Scarborough. They're relocating from another location in Scarborough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside, you had a question?
I sure do, thank you. In terms of autism services, who normally would fund that?
I'm not the expert.
Well, you're smarter than me, so I'll give it to you.
But the province funds autism services, I believe.
And what's the purpose of this facility?
This is providing, my understanding, I didn't write the BMR report, and I don't see Chris Brillinger here, but I'm going back from memory. It provides community support services
for autism.
And
Gotcha.
council agreed to put them in as a BMR.
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of you said the revenues went into this park acquisition fund. Was it actual, I'll say, profit as opposed, is it the total revenue, or is it revenue once expenses have been subtracted?
There's an operating surplus every year for the last number of years.
It's operating surplus?
Yes. So we end up splitting that with the school board each year.
50/50?
50/50.
Okay, thanks. And then in terms of these upgrades that are needed beyond what council, I guess, was originally told, would that be a 50/50 split with the school board as well?
No, the school board's not participating with this tenant. So what normally happens is, the way the agreement reads is, if the city wants to use the, I'll say, floor space for its own purposes, we have to pay, I'll say, a minor rent of a few dollars a square foot. If the school board wants to use it, it pays also a nominal rent per square foot. So in this case, we are using the space, we are paying for our use of that space, and the tenant is paying us back at that rate.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get my head around this, so let me just confirm this. So we're essentially want to spend this money to provide a service that is normally paid for by the province, but we're actually going to pay for it on our own because the provincially funded school board doesn't want to be involved. And then lastly, we're investing in a building that may be torn down. Is that kind of how it goes?
So I would just, one point I would correct, I don't know if the province would normally fund these kinds of capital improvements. I doubt it. They provide operating funds.
Would the city normally fund it?
So as the report mentions, generally these expenditures would be ours for base building upgrades and compliance, but some of this expenditure is what the tenant would normally fund. In this case, the tenant doesn't have the resources to do it, so if we want to complete the BMR, that's why I'm asking council, do you want to fund this?
But I'm not too far off in my assertion then, or assumptions.
They needed some adjusting.
I think they're pretty close. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, you had some questions?
Yes, maybe I can, through playing Jeopardy, asking questions, maybe help out here. First of all, BMR doesn't mean we lose money, does it? They don't get this place for $1. They take care of the bills we receive. Is that not?
They would be paying the operating costs, yes.
Okay, so we don't lose money on the deal, and the rent ends up in a reserve such that later on, if capital improvements are needed for this BMR tenant or any others, there's money to cover it, because that's where the money sits. That's not the case?
This is a little different. We have market buildings there that are paying market rents, and through a resolution approved back, I believe it was 1995 or 1996, pre-amalgamation, those net revenues, as Joe Casali has said, are going into the Parkland Dedication Reserve, which is a unique situation.
Okay. Now, and also, this center, I think there's sort of a misunderstanding. It's actually called the South Asian Awareness Center, not Services Center. There are autism services, many of them, and as of this week, lots more of them, funded provincially. But when we get into things like music, dance, and art, after-school programs, artistic mind painting programs, pre-employment and vocational skills programs, those are things that for other Torontonians we fund through community and social development grants, do we not? And even recreation grants, those sorts of things?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Budget Chair, yes, that's correct, and that's why when it was brought forward as a BMR,
yes,
it's not just about autism, it provides other services and does align with the city's BMR policies.
And the goal of this group has always been, and this is why we're interested in entertaining this, the goal of this group has always been to make sure that we are not just looking at a building full of differently abled children, but that in this particular cultural group, there is a slower rate of awareness within this cultural group, and the point here is to provide a level of programs such that we provide for all other children in Toronto, that differently abled children are in these programs with other children of this same culture, but to use a term my daughter would hate, normally abled children would also be using them because of the quality of the program, and that's what this group has been growing year over year and are now ready to take on a BMR. Is that not why we're looking at this center?
That's what SDFA has indicated to us in terms of the needs. and the greater community being able to also utilize the space.
Exactly. Thank you. Well, put me down to speak, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
So the building is jointly owned by the city and the school board. And the school board, it's 50-50 as far as the operating, but not capital, right?
It's 50-50, both operating and capital, if it was just general capital maintenance of the buildings. What we're talking about here is the space inside the building that normally a tenant would take on. So they're creating a gym in the space. Normally, we as a city wouldn't take on that capital expense. But it's the gym is there and the breakout rooms are there to educate the children in the program.
So we have the communication by Councillor DeBearmaker. You've seen that,
Yes,
right?
I just saw it, yes.
Yeah. So we've already approved 150.
Council committed to 150,000, yes.
That's all. And so this report is to increase that from the 150.
Yes. It's in terms of the additional work, when I had the original conversation with the councillor, I indicated that we would pay up to the $150,000 for normal capital improvements. So now the result is that the potential tenant here is unable to raise the funds to undertake the normal tenant work. And so we're asking that we be allowed to use the money from this reserve to pay towards the tenant improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions myself. So I guess the $370,000 that is we're going to be approving coming from this reserve, is this the appropriate use for this reserve for the work that's going to be taking place?
So we tried to track down the original 1995 approval, and I think there was, I don't know if we actually did find it, Marco? Yes. Oh, you did find it, okay.
For improvements to that site.
Okay, so the money we're spending is actually appropriate use for what we're doing on the.
So based upon the previous council position of the Scarborough Council, it was for building improvements and property improvements. I think that it was also intended, though, to build a park on that as well.
Okay, and again, on this, what if we take this money out, what is the reserve fund at now? Or if we approve this?
So as I said, so there were $1.8 million of lease revenues that were deposited in the reserve over time. So there's $1.8 million of just that pot of fund. I don't think it's appropriate to take parkland dedication monies for these building improvements. That would absolutely not be appropriate. So the question was there a sufficient lease revenues in there to fund these expenditures? And there is. There was $1.8 million of lease revenues in the fund that have been tracked. So even after these expenditures, there'd still be $1.3 million of lease revenues in the fund.
And are we contributing, or I guess the lessees, actually, the tenants have been contributing to this. Are we contributing to this moving forward or on an ongoing basis, or is this just sort of money that's been sitting there for a while and we're now tapping into it?
This is something that happens annually. I'll confirm with Joe.
Yeah, annually we settle with the school board.
Okay.
So we wouldn't be, after this, we would not be putting in any more capital unless it was related to the envelope of the building, I'll say.
Okay, so when this money's gone, the money's gone out of this particular reserve? So,
No, money keeps,
sorry, okay.
money keeps
You're
flowing into the
replenishing. It's a
reserve
rent
each
reserve.
year.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So as per the
Yeah.
previous
My
council
mistake.
approval, the net revenues every year get deposited into this.
Okay, yeah, I get you. Okay, thank you. I will go to speakers. I have a motion on this, so I'll speak first. That City Council increase the 2017 capital budget and plan for facilities, real estate, environment, and energy in the amount of $370,000 for the capital sub-project, and reading down there, this more or less says we will be supporting this. I've spoken with Councillor DeBearmaker on this. He did want to be here for this item today. He was at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and he couldn't do this. So this is, again, understanding the comments from some of the committee members about should or we shouldn't be doing this and where we're going on in the future. This is, and staff just mentioned that the appropriate use for this particular improvements on what we're looking at doing. Again, with regard to the South Asian Awareness, Artistic Awareness Center, we did support, as a previous council decision, with below market rent on this particular site. So I do feel comfortable that this is the proper use of this money for what they're looking at doing, and ultimately the service that this agency is providing is a good agency to the community. So I'm moving that motion. All in favor?
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're right, I forgot about that. Okay.
No, I'm sorry, you're not going to, because I asked to speak earlier, so unfortunately, no, you do have to listen to me. Further to my questions, I think we really have to be careful here, because there are a lot of investments in autism coming forward from other orders of government now. That does not negate the fact that through our various grants, recreation, et cetera, all sorts of grants, we actually end up funding through grant funding, not core administration funding, not funding a program such as, oh my gosh, we're stuck with this thing, it's too big to fail, and we made it happen. But people come forward with project grants that put inclusion into community programming. That make sure that folks that are being included in the school system are also being included in their recreation and free life. And the reason we do that is because currently, once these folks become adults, they're all our problem. We're cost sharing in the administration of ODSP, which is what they all earn if they're unemployable because they don't know how to be included in anything other than the classroom. And they are overrepresented in our social housing. So we do invest in helping them be included in society. It's through grant funding. You're not sticking your neck out too far, and that's a highly accountable thing. But the focus of this group is to make sure that they destigmatize and include and have as many people in the community as possible being there, so that it's not so much autism services, but within a cultural group, autism awareness, such that everyone is comfortable. Because the amount of inclusion going on and program being spent by other governments means that one day you will sit side by side with these people. One day there will be a counselor sitting around this table who is a high-functioning autistic person. That's the goal of education system and of society, and that's what this place is about. I will just quickly describe, Mr. Chair, how far we have to move on this. I was sent back to Hong Kong to follow up on something that came up to us on the last day of the trade mission visit there. The Consul General wanted us to see it, even though it wasn't on our itinerary. An adult employment program that starts the minute you finish school, make sure that people are totally comfortable in society and in fact employable, and runs its own chain of coffee stores to make sure of that. And here's how it works. Below market rent there is $1. The government says we have this space. It's 705 Progress is sitting in an industrial park east of Scarborough Town Centre. And while there are a couple of condos in that area, we don't actually want any more condos. We're actually, by policy, trying to preserve the employment. So it might never be a school, but as we have to save it, this is a case of best possible use in that situation. There's an agency who wants to use it and is willing to cover its costs. So that's what we do with those things. So I hope that there won't be quite so much concern in the future about things like this, and a better understanding of why we BMR a place that we actually can't sell, but an agency wants to use. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Campbell.
Well, I'm not going to support this. So first of all, I want to say I think that the report that's presented to us at this late hour is wholly inadequate. There's no word in here, unless I've missed it, on what the annual revenues are from the property. There's no word on the zoning. If this is in an industrial area, I know that Councillor Thompson had an issue in his area where there was a Muslim organization trying to establish a community center in an industrial area, and they've been prohibited from doing that. So I don't know even how this is zoned. There's no mention of that in here. Can I just, Shelley, please? There's no word on why the organization is relocating. There's no word on how else the parkland acquisition funds might otherwise be used. There's no word on the organization that is supposedly relocating here, what their finances are, or how many people they serve. So, you know, and this is a unit that's been vacant since 1999, and now we're fixing it up for an organization, and there's all of these questions. So I'm not going to support this, and I'm going to ask for a recorded vote.
Okay.
Happily.
On that, we will have a recorded vote. I'll begin. All in favor? Yeah. Oh,
All in favour? Councillor Burnside, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Layton, Councillor Nunziata. Those opposed? Councillor Campbell. Motion carries.
thank you, folks. I think that is the last item, so we are now adjourned. And we'll see you next month or next. Yeah, that's the last budget meeting till September, so have a great summer. Well, it's only 11.